Bonjour. That's about as far as my French goes. I could do Hallo, which is German, which is where I'm from. My name is Ben. I'm based in London, and I work with the Android developer team at Google. And I've been focusing on instant apps for a while now. And during that time, I talked a little bit about it. I made some samples available for developers, but I also think it's good to get some hands-on experience with that whole thing because, well, there's a couple of things that are a bit tricky to wrap your mind around in the first place. And that's where I went through the process from migrating an already existing app that is installed to an instant app. And I think that many of you that have an app will, at some point, if they consider going through the process of migration, go through a similar path that I've been going through. So that's why I did that. But before we get started, who of you has an app that they actively develop? Well, that's quite a lot. So the process of becoming a developer for an instant app will also make you a developer of a library, because that's what kind of is implicitly within that process. And I will show you the whole process and what it entails. But before we go into this part of the presentation, I wanted to take a moment to tell you a little bit about what Android instant apps actually are. So, Android instant apps make it possible to have an app available on your device with the click of a button instead of going through the Play Store or any other stores. What happens is you click a link and you get the app on your device. It's been announced at Google I/O 2016, and then we worked with early access partners for a long time to make it available to more developers, and at Google I/O 2017 we announced that it's publicly available and that every developer can make their Android app an instant app. And before we had that, this was the kind of the process of discovering an application. So you typed on your phone, you saw, oh, there's no app for this available. Then it took you to the Play Store, or you went through Google search and you searched for an app, or somebody sent you a link and you had to install the app. Basically that entailed you first had to find an app, and then you had to install the app, and then you had to use the app. So that's quite a funnel for your users that you can see. It's like, oh, there's many people that actually find the app and might be interested, but then they're like, oh yeah, do I really want to have this on my phone? Maybe I've got restrictions with the file size and everything. And after a while, they don't really use the app, so they just throw it off their phone. So that's quite a lot of friction. And with Android instant apps, we just made that friction a lot less. So with Android instant apps, all you have to do is you search something, in this case the New York Times crossword, that has an instant app available. So you can see on that little, this is the actual search result, by the way. This is what I saw when I searched for the New York Times crossword puzzle. And from there, I just click on that card and up comes the app. So that's the new process with an instant app. So it makes it a lot shorter, a lot faster, and the users don't have to go through a lot of flows that they had to go through before. And it's available to more than a billion devices. So that means that a lot of users actually can use your applications. We're currently targeting devices down to Lollipop. So that means that there's a lot of the legacy things of Android that you don't have to worry about, but everything from Lollipop onwards is compatible with an Android instant app. So let's talk a little bit about the developer requirements, because there's a couple of things that you have to keep in mind when you develop an instant app. The one is, like I said, to target at least for the instant app, Lollipop and above. There's a way to do that you have your installed app available to older devices as well, and I will talk about that later in this presentation. Also, you will have to use Android Studio 3.0 and above, which has been stable for quite a while now, so we're currently targeting the 3.1 canaries and the 3.2 canaries that should be rolling out as well. With that comes the Instant App SDK, which you can use and should use within your application. There's also libraries that allow you to make it a little bit easier for you to see whether your users are running in an Instant App context, and to make installation fairly seamless, because it basically creates the intent and it shows you a button that your users can click when they want to install the app from your instant app. Also, there's Gradle plugins, which have been newly introduced. One of them is the feature plugin, which is essentially the Chrome Android library plugin, but adjusted for an instant app. So, and obviously for instant apps. There's another Gradle plugin, the Com Android Instant App plugin. I'll show you how to use those and how they work later in this presentation. Also, one thing that you need is the app links assistant. You don't really need the app links assistant, but it makes it easier to link your application from your web side or from your server side to your Android app, so the Play Store actually knows that there is an instant app available for this application, and that we can then shortcut the path between your user clicking that link and the Play Store to serve the application directly. And with the assistant, basically, you give it the key store, you give it a little bit of information on what URLs you're targeting, and then you will receive a file, and that file you can upload to your server. And once it's on the server, you can check whether it's actually working. That's what the App Links Assistant does. And like I said, you don't have to use it, but it makes it a little bit easier. And it comes bundled with Android Studio, so it makes the flow fairly seamless. Also, each emulator that has a Play Store supports Android Instant Apps. So just create an account or use your developer's account, sign into your emulator, and you can play around with Instant Apps on there as well. And the screenshot that you saw earlier, I took it off my emulator, so I didn't even plug in a real device. I took a screenshot of my real device, but on the emulator. Just a quick detour and a big praise to the emulator team. Who of you uses the emulator actively? If you don't, is that because it was slow or because it didn't have the features that you needed? If so, please just raise a hand. So now the emulator is just so super fast. So deploying an application to the emulator is faster than when you try and deploy it on a real device. If you don't use sensors, well, you can use sensors on the emulator as well, but if you don't have any goals like using the application on a longer term basis, but just for development, the emulator is just the best thing that I've been using since a while now, and it's really, really fast. It boots up quickly. You can save states, so you could even just go to points where you have within your application, you found that this state now triggers a bug. You can save that state and always come back to the state. And a couple of other nice and nifty features, and it's just super, super fast. So give it another shot, play around with it. I was super impressed when I saw those changes. Back to Instant Apps. And there's a refactoring tool. That refactoring tool currently is available for Java applications. We're working on the refactoring tool for Kotlin applications as well, but it's not available yet. Speaking of Java and Kotlin, who of you is using Kotlin in their production app? Cool. So you will definitely have to go currently through that flow with the modularization, but hey, big up to Kotlin. It's way more fun to run applications that way. So another thing that you have to keep in mind for your Instant App is that you have a 4 megabyte limit for a downloadable bundle. What that means, I will talk about that later, but this is just for production. So while you're developing your application, the application can still be as big as it is. Once you start uploading it to the Play Store, it has to be less than 10 megabytes. But once you want to serve it to your real users, you have to go for 4 megabytes or less for the downloadable bundle, because otherwise it's not really instant, it just takes too long to download. And how to get there, I'll talk about that during this presentation as well. So now we've covered the Instant App part. So what is an Instant App, how you can generally develop it, and let's take a look at the app that I've looked at and that I've integrated. It's Topeka. It's a sample that I've been working on for quite a while now. But what is it? It's a fun-to-play quiz that's available on GitHub at Google Samples Android Topeka. Go check it out. It's now in Kotlin. It features transitions, animations, and now also it's already shipped. The Instant App part is already out there as well. This is what it looks like. So there's a sign-in screen, which is its own activity. There is a category screen, which has all those nice images, and it transitions from one to the other. And you can scroll through and pick an activity, pick a category. And there's the quiz activity, which basically is loads of quizzes, loads of questions within a category. Each of these are their own activities with their own fragments and a couple of custom UI parts and UI components in there. And finally, once we're done with this presentation, what I've done is I separated the sign-in part, the categories part, and the quiz part into each a separate module that can be downloaded individually to a user's device. Like I said, I've been developing this for a while, so I'll just give you a brief overview of how long it's taken to get here. So first commit was in 2014. After that, in May, it was published to GitHub. And there were transitions added afterwards, so I don't know if you have ever played with the window content transitions, basically, or shared element transitions. It basically makes things look a lot nicer and stuff flows between the activities and takes the user through, makes it easier for the user to understand where they're coming from, where they're going within the context of your application. Then I dropped the minutes decay version to be compatible down to API level 16, and finally the Limbo stopped at API level 14. That's where it is, and that's where it's going to stay for the not for the instant app, but for the installable app, even after the migration. In 2017, I rewrote the whole thing in Kotlin, so it's now fully available in Kotlin. There's still a Java branch, which I'm probably just going to deprecate or delete at some point, but so far it's still there if you want to look at the Java implementation, but it's fully written in Kotlin now. And now, it's an instant app as well. So you can take a look and see how that modularization worked. You can look at all the code, look at all the things that I had to do, and let's go through that part, what I actually did. Firstly, I went to the documentation site. You can find that at g.co/instantapps or just Google Android Instant Apps documentation. And then I looked through all the things that I had to do and like all the features that my application had. And I made a list because every now and then having a to-do list or just a backlog of things to do helps. And in that case, what I had to do is there's manual login within the application, and that is not supported within Instant Apps by policy because we want your users to be in your application as quickly as possible, and we don't want the users to have to wait or to create an account or to sign in. So there's smart mode for that. How we do that is, I'll show you that in a minute. Also, the application is not URL addressable. Like I said, it's URLs that you take that you use for your instant apps. So there has to be some URL that's backing your activity, the changes within the activities, and also that the Play Store is able to address it directly. So we have to do this part as well. And the size is more than 4 megabytes. So the signed, pro-guarded release build was 5.2 megabytes. So that's quite a bit of limbo that we have to go there. We have to find a way to push down that limit a lot. So that's the to-do list that we're going to work through now. That means I sat down, started coding. I realized I did a couple of things wrong, so I played a little bit with the Git history and changed a couple of things, and then I went back to the part with the sign-in. Well, sign-in is basically with the Smart Log API, what you can do is you can just automatically sign in your users. They don't have to create an account directly with you, but you basically give them an option of signing in with a couple of identity providers. You will get a username, you will get a user ID, which usually is the email address that the user has chosen. You can get tokens, or you can also ask the user later on to set a password, and you can directly use that within your systems as a regular user. That reduces the friction of signing users in and makes it a lot easier, because if I have to sign in with like username, password, repeating the password, then my address, then my date of birth, then my mom's maiden name, then my first pet's name, no, that's it. So that makes users less likely to drop off and faster to access your content. What we actually want as a developer is we want to be able to save the user's credentials to the backend. We want to be able to retrieve the user's data, so if they're already signed in. And there's another thing, because we're in Android, the way it works is you will get the result in your activity once there is a response from the API. So those are the three things that actually matter to us as developers. And since we're in Kotlin, I created an extension function for context, which basically always gets the client. Then there's two other methods that we have to call is request, to request the user's credentials and see if it's there. And on the other hand, we also have to store the user's credentials. That's all we need. But those are already abstracted away, so you can only see them within that helper class. But take a look, because I think that solution is quite handy. And for the activity, in your own activity results, you always have to call this method. Cool thing about that method is that it basically just passes through all the information that already is there. There's just two things that actually matter. It's success, that's a method, that takes a method, and passes back a player. It's asynchronous, so whenever the player is ready, that method that you passed in there will be called. So you know that there's a user available, and you can start using it. And until then, you can have UI in a loading state. Also, there's a failure method, which basically always, because it's a sample app, defaults back to trying it again, and after a couple of tries, it just tells the user that it didn't work. You should probably do something different in the failure method, but for a sample, that's fair enough. And this is what the developer actually uses. So again, in the credentials helper, I created for the activity and for the context one extension method each. There's just request login, which then passes in the success method. So I just request a login, pass in the method, and that's all I need to do. And in one place, I also have a logout method, which basically logs out the user and removes all that. That's quite cool for production, but for testing, that is quite cumbersome because you would rely on a third-party service that is not completely out of your control because you don't know whether your CI servers have actual internet access or whether you mock stuff. Within Topeka, there is no real mocking because, well, so far I didn't use it and I didn't need it. So all I did is I created an interface which has two implementations, the default login, which is used within the production app, and the test login, which is used for testing purposes. And basically all it has are those two methods, which are then encapsulated in the things that we saw earlier. So, well, it's a little bit of dancing around it, but in the end, the developer only has to call two methods, the request login and the logout at the other part. So for the developer, on the top level, it doesn't really matter what happens underneath it. So that's quite cool. And that's, again, the library developer's mindset, because whatever happens underneath doesn't really matter to the people that implement it and that work with your API. So make the API that you, in the end, use as simple as possible. And with things like Kotlin, it's fairly easy because you don't have to pass in loads of parameters. With extension functions, you can just implicitly have those pass-ins already and work on the objects themselves. Cool, so we solved our first issue and we went into a little bit of library development already. So let's take on the next step. That's URL addressability. So, what do you need to make your URL addressable? Well, firstly, this is what you actually want to do. Whenever you get a URL that is mapped to your instant app, you want your users to be directly directed to the instant app. That's literally all you want to have. And this is what you get after your application is URL addressable. Well, mostly. You can still decide how many of your users or what percentage of your users should go to the instant app and which percentage should go to the website. So you can still run your A/B testing and you can still have both of those. So it's not mutually exclusive. You could say 50% of my users should go to the instant app and the other half should go to the website. But that's also only for Android. So you could also send all your Android users directly to the instant app if you basically don't want to make an Android-specific version of your mobile website anymore, or if you don't want to spend a lot of time on that. Also, if you don't have a website, that's fine either way. So you can add some part of your domain to just map to that instant app, and on the other hand, you have to basically have a landing site or something like that. So that's possible as well. Let's take a look at how this works as a developer. So far, this code is one of the probably most written codes for changing activities, basically. Allows you to change to the quiz activity with a little bit of extra information. This is explicit. It doesn't work anymore for your instant app because, well, it's different modules, and different modules basically means they don't know about the classes. You could kind of work around that by setting the package names and everything, which this does under the hood. Or you could go do it the way that it's done for instant app, and that is basically, same thing, you want to use something with a URL to that, and you want to add the category default and browsable. Browsable because this is what you want to have. You want to browse the content, you want to view it. But if your device has one other application that has those two categories, which usually is the browser, you will get a disambiguation dialog, which basically asks, hey, do you want to open this with the browser or do you want to open it with the app? And your user could click always, or you could take that away from the user and just say, I want to do this within that context, within that package name. So in this case, it's a Topeka package namespace, and only this should handle, like this application should handle that intent. If it's not available, then still it tries to bubble up, but if it's available, it just uses that. So no more disambiguation dialogues. Quite handy as well. So for encapsulating all that, I create a base URL, and there's one URL for the sign-in, there's another one for categories, and another one for quizzes. The quizzes basically have a category ID attached to it. So it's basically quiz, and after that it says food or whatever it is that I want to view. So I can jump in each of those points directly from any given URL that's on there. Also, a little bit of change to your Android manifests. So the Android manifest for each activity has to have, for each activity that you want to be able to have as an entry point for your instant app, you have to set the auto-verify flag to true. So the Play Store can verify whether the URL that you pass in there is correct. I found that the easiest way because otherwise there's loads of redundancy because you have to have both the HTTP and the HTTPS schemes available for your instant app, and this makes it just possible for just writing one line each, other than just duplicating the whole thing. And you have to have that for each of your activities, like I just said. So the app is now URL addressable. Cool, straightforward. Quite happy with the way that worked. And now let's take a look at the big piece, which is the application. So for most of you probably have one application module. Can I get a show of hand who just has one application module and that's it? Okay, more than one module. Okay, and the other ones are probably still looking into developing because there's not all the hands that could have been seen. But anyways, this works. So modularization means that you take that monolith that you have, which is your application, and break it up into pieces that make sense to you and are logical pieces and components of your application. So the way I usually do this, I take the app module, which is generated by default, and rename that to base, because that is where I'm starting off from. That is what's going to be my base module. And in theory, you could just have two modules on top of that and it would be done with development. So you could just have an install module, which is the replacement for your base module. And for the instant app, have an instant module. And you're already good to go with having an app that you can still ship to the Play Store as an installed app, and an instant app that you can play around with the same code base. So there's no need to fork away, there's no need to make many changes within your code base other than those changes that we have done before. So no need to modularize just yet if you just want to get started with it. So this is perfect for getting you started with. And in your settings Gradle, obviously you have to change from app to base and add those other two modules. The plugin that we're using will generate for the instant app an APK for the base module. And that instant, in the instant app, there's basically just a zip file that holds that, and you can upload to the Play Store. But for your install app, it's going to create an AAR. So all the code that is in your module, so base module or feature modules, now is libraries, which, well, from the output just doesn't make a lot of difference. But from the mindset that you might want to consider, it will make a little bit of difference once we go into more than one module. So let's take a look at the Gradle plugins that we're using. So the Android application plugin is the one that probably everyone that has written an app already uses. Also there's the instant app module, which I mentioned earlier, which basically just holds a build Gradle file with very little information on it, and the output, so the zip file after you've been building it. But other than that, there's no code in it. It's not designed to take any code into account. If you have code in the module that is declared as an instant app, that code will not be compiled. That code will not be run. So before you scratch your heads and wonder why doesn't my instant app do something different, you put it in there. It's not going to be taken into account. Also, there's the feature plugin, which basically, like I said, replaces the library plugin, and which you'll have to use for the for all the modules that will be holding the code for the application. That's cool, but the size still not there yet. So no changes there. We're just still starting to get everything modularized. So let's actually do some modularization. We've got a base module. That base module holds everything. But like I said, I want to create a couple of more modules. So one of them is a categories module, and one of them is a quiz module. paid attention, then that means that there is something missing, and that is the sign-in module. There is no sign-in module, because sign-in is essential to the whole application. Without sign-in, the user can't really function within the application. So this is why sign-in, the activity and all the code related to that, lives within base. That is a decision that I made for this app. It can be different for your app, but in many cases, your base module holds a couple of key features that we'll go through in a second as well. And again, those three modules are then going to be distributed to your instant app and to your install app. Your instant and install app basically just declare dependencies on the application, on your other modules, and you're good to go with that. Now it's time to detangle all that spaghetti code you've ever written, because being a library developer and working with modules basically means that you can't have loads of dependencies and dependencies between those codes, between the code, because, well, you can have them, but you have to be clear about it, and you can't just put everything anywhere and say, yeah, it works, and I've already had this here, and it worked already, but you have to be clear about all the resources and everything that is within your application, and have to make sure that it's properly structured and exposed in a decent way. So, for the base module, I've chosen to have all the shared code in there. So all the helper classes are in there, all the code that's being used for signing users in, and a couple of other things that I'm doing there. Also all the dependencies. So there's, of course, you still can have dependencies on other libraries, like the design library or whatever libraries you're using, or whatever dependency injection or support libraries you're using. There's two keywords for Gradle for using dependencies. One of them is implementation, and the implementation keyword basically means that this module is using that library or that dependency, and is not exposing it any further. So this is the final point for this dependency. But on the other hand, you can also use the API keyword, so API for the dependency, and that means that that this module uses that library, but also exposes it further on. So if somebody else exposes that, if you want to use that within a different library or within a different module, then this is what you use. So for example, the support libraries are being used not only within the one module, but within different modules as well. That's why it's API instead of implementation. It's good to keep that in mind, because otherwise stuff will break, or you will have the dependencies in multiple places. So using the API keyword allows me to have the dependency, like the actual code and the resources, only in one single point, and I don't have to download it or have the user download it multiple times, but it's just this one time within the one base module. Like I said, also all the utility classes are in there, all the utility methods, everything that's being used within more than one of the modules after all. Also the model classes, because, well, I use those there as well, and the data layers, so the database and all the methods that I'm using for the database are based in there as well. Also, shared resources. What does that mean? So that means all the colors that I'm using throughout the application live within the base module. All the themes and all the styles have to be on the base module. Well, you can still have dummy implementation on your feature modules, but the actual implementation of your themes and styles has to be in the base module, because that's where it all comes from. Also shared drawables, so the application icon and other things, like in that case, it's the avatars that want to live in, or that have to live within the base module. All the strings that are being shared, not the ones that are not being shared, so just module-specific strings can live within within their own modules. And the transitions, because, well, they're being, these are transitions from the sign-in activity to the other activities live in there as well. One more thing that kind of is a bit of a headache when you don't think of it in the first place, but afterwards it's fairly straightforward again, is that your package name, at least for your modules, will change. Your application package name and your instant app package name, in this case, will still be com, Google, samples, apps, Topeka. That's the package name of the application and the instant app. But for the modules and libraries that you're developing, it makes sense to introduce another subset in that package name to make clear where stuff is coming from. So if you move stuff around and move things around, you're probably missing that in the first place. So there's, for Topeka, there's 3 4 distinct package names. So there's the Topeka package name, there's Topeka base, and Topeka categories, and Topeka quiz. And you have to make sure that all your imports are correctly done. If you, like it happens in many cases, have imports from multiple sources, you can either go with the fully qualified import name, say .r.drawable, whatever, or within Kotlin you can alias these. So you could say, the one that I'm usually using is base, so base is still R. The one that's from base quiz, I could just alias that to r_quiz. So I don't have to have the fully qualified import, and Kotlin does all the magic underneath the hood. So it's still nice and easy to read. Let's take a look at what all the other modules what we have to do for what I did for that. So they host all the controllers, so the fragments and the activities. Also custom views that are being just used within those activities and within those modules. Also tests. Well, yeah, testing is important, and Topeka hosts quite a decent set of tests for UI tests and also unit tests. You can run each of those APKs because, well, there is an APK on your device individually. You can test each of those APKs individually. So you can, all the test code that is related to those activities should live in there. Also, each of the activities or each of those modules has their own separate Android manifest, which is basically stripped down to just the activity and potentially content providers or whatever you're using in their services. And it's basically just a part of that manifest that you're using in the first place, which for the installed app will be fully merged again. Like, pretty cool with Android Studio. You can just see this is the one that's actually in there, but you also can click a tab on the bottom and see what the merged manifest would look like in the end. Also, all the drawables and assets that are being used for just this module. Fun story, before I shipped the code, I was like, oh yeah, let me just take another look at it. And I did some reordering of commits because the whole thing is going to be a code lab as well. And apparently, during that whole process and the rebasing, I must have missed one of the drawables, one set of the drawables, and put it in the wrong, within the wrong modules. And I looked at it, oh, this is not nice, but suddenly all the drawables were missing. And I just realized that. So I had to go back one more time, make sure that all the imports are correct. So that's again the base or categories or quiz package name that you have to change there. So quick fix for that, but that can happen. So make sure that you're extra clear with where your assets live and what imports they actually have. Yeah, and I just said package name changes are potentially another thing that has to be done for that. That's cool, like all the things are now modules. That's where we have 3 different modules for the application, but the size is still big for an instant app. You can still run it, you can still ship your code already, as it was to your users that use the installed app. You can play around with the instant app, and you're already halfway there, because so far, all you have is these 3 modules, which overall, in the biggest download module are like 5.1 megabytes. No, not sure, that was 4.6 or 4.7, I guess, megabytes. That's still too big for a productionized instant app. So what can we do? Welcome configuration APKs. Configuration APKs is a fairly cool thing that you can use for your instant app. It allows you to split break up your APKs by screen density, user language, or processor architecture. If you don't use native code, the processor architecture isn't really that important. If you have just one language, that is not really important as well. But everyone has multiple screen densities, so that is super important. Let's see how it works. This is what you have for your application. You will still get a base APK, and you have all your drawables in there. But with the configuration APKs API, you will also get one APK for each of those drawable configurations. So you will have a base APK, which is way smaller because it doesn't contain all the resources anymore. And you will have multiple APKs that can be installed alongside the base APK for all of those configurations. And the biggest one that we will get is this. So that's the base APK and the XXX HTTPI drawable APK. This is now your biggest configuration. that you will have to download, you have to give to your user. So all of those, all the other ones, are not going to be shipped to your user anymore, unless they use a device that has one of these configurations. So that's quite handy. That makes the APK a lot smaller. And we can do this for each and every of the modules. So instead of having just 3 APKs in there, you will have now a lot more APKs in there. But again, your users won't really won't really mind that there's all of those APKs, because all they get is the base APK in the first place, plus the configuration APK. Same for the other 2, they just get the one that actually matters to them. This is where the part with the min SDK version and API levels comes in, because this is an API that has been introduced in Lollipop. You can't use it for applications that are targeting lower API levels. But you still want to use it, at least for your instant app. This is where flavors come in. Flavors currently are defined with flavor dimensions. We're just introducing one more flavor dimension for the delivery in the base module, and each of the feature modules as well. And we have 2 different delivery mechanisms. The one is installed, which does not have any other code, just say, this is now dimension delivery, and one for instant. The instant app has a higher min SDK version. I'm using a variable here. I should have probably put just 21 here, which is the same thing. And with that, we're good to go with the next step, which basically says if there is something missing for your installed app, we just tell Gradle how to resolve this missing dimension, because we don't want to declare it on the manifest on the Gradle file itself. We just say if we have this if the dimension that we're missing is delivery, then pick installed for the instant app and instant for the instant app. So now your installed app still will be the one APK, but the instant app will be all of those APKs that are being generated. Cool, so with that, we dropped the file size considerably. We're now at 3.5, 3.6 megs for the biggest configuration that you can download to your users. And let's take a look at the next thing that we can do. This just very briefly, I will not go into too much detail there. ProGuard is one of the features that, well, many people love or loathe because it's super handy, but configuring it correctly is kind of tricky. But it helps a lot with security because it makes your code more obscure, and on the other hand, it can decrease the file size even further by stripping away stuff A that you don't need, or just compressing stuff a little bit further. The most important part is because you're now a library developer, and I was with that mindset, with that mind basically means that you have to keep all your API services, so all the methods that you want to use from other parts intact. So that means all the stuff that you're using from your third-party dependencies, support libraries, all the APIs that you're using from that have to be visible, as well as the silent part, as well as some of the classes and methods that you're referring to explicitly from your base module have to be visible to you so you can still use them. It would work within development, but it would break as soon as you try and run it. My colleague Wojtek, who will give a session after this one, has written a great blog post enabling ProGuard in an Android instant app. We're making some changes to that as well, so we're improving that as well. But until then, you can also take a look in the instant ProGuard profile and the module files for Topeka, because he came up with a fairly nifty script to automate the process to get the things out of your build that you need for your other modules, so the ones that are needed in there. So just take a look, try and see if the script works for you. And you don't have to go through everything manually, but can go through the process in an automated way. Since this is a sample, I didn't go the whole way, so I'm still missing the link to the Applinks with the Applinks assistant to an actual to link it to an actual website. But from ADB, it already works straight ahead. And I didn't upload it to the Play Store just yet. So those two things are missing from my side, but they've been covered in other sessions, and also the documentation is fairly well available for that, so I won't do this in this session anymore. What I would like you to remember from this session is, firstly, go through all the things that you have to do for your application. Read up on the Instant Apps documentation, see what things you're missing, see what things you have to do, make a list, and go through that. Also, applying the new plugins makes you a library developer. Keep that in mind. And refactor potentially one feature at a time. Don't try to go the whole way, but take the most important feature you think is the most important for your Instant App and has the most value for you and your users, and start with that feature and see how it works. And then you can take it from there step by step. And adhere to the size constraints. And this is the one reason where it's at one point where or else makes a lot of sense. Or else your users won't benefit from all your hard work, and that would be a shame. There's more resources available for that. One of them is the source code for the sample. One of them is the source code for the samples. So the Android Instant App samples is an ever-evolving set of samples for Instant Apps. There's also blog posts, and there's the documentation available. And with all that, thank you very much for your attention and your time. Do we have time for questions?
Hello. Thanks for the talk. I have one quick question because previously, I think on already Instant Apps, we had to declare a metadata into the manifest, which is the target sandbox version something. Does it still need it, or
the sandbox version? Is that the one you're referring to? Is Target Sandbox version 2? So Target Sandbox version v2 is not really necessary if you don't want to have your users migrate everything automatically. And I currently don't. I would say if you're working with an existing app, don't use it because it is dangerous. Because you have to adhere to a couple of more strict things. So strict mode applies a lot harder to that. So you will not be able to use HTTP in your application. Also, your install application, and a couple of other things. So and you will not be able to go back from that. There is a way. It makes sense to go down that road at some point, but you have to first be very clear about what the restrictions are of the Target Sandbox version. And you have to make this decision very consciously. And if you start creating a new application and you have all traffic going through HTTPS anyway, so secure traffic, which you should, but many of you at some point don't have it, which is, we know about that. You currently probably don't want to go this way. If you want to have your user data migrated without using that API, you can use the cookies API, which basically allows you to store a byte array. And you can, on the other end of the install app, retrieve that data as well. So if you don't have to go through it, and if you're unclear about it, read up on it. If you have questions on it, either just shoot me a DM, they're open, or just ask there, or go and Stack Overflow, ask questions, or try and approach it another way, because we're always happy to help with making that decision. Because yes, that's a very, very tricky decision in the first place.
Hello, I'm Alexander. Thank you so much for the talk. I have a question. We know that instant apps are not enabled by default on pre-Oreo devices, and that users of, let's say, like Lollipop devices have to enable it, like in the Google settings. I was not able to find any information on the internet how big is the market, like how many users actually did that, and are there some plans to enable it by default on pre-Oreo devices?
As far as I know, that was the case. Absolutely right. That was before we fully integrated that into the terms of service for the Play Store. Because before that, Instant Apps, we were working towards that, and we still had to clarify and make sure that the users give the explicit consent that they want to use instant applications. But from now on, or a while ago already, that was flipped. So your users already have instant apps enabled if they have signed into the Play Store and agreed to the terms of service they want.
Okay. I have 2 more questions. Is it okay to ask? Or?
It's fine with me. Please.
Okay. Then the second question is, like, we know that app indexing improves a bit search engine optimization, and is that the case with instant apps? Because, like, the content can be crawlable actually once the instant app is released.
Yes.
Okay. And I have one more question. I'm really sorry for taking your time. The question is, like, the try now button was released some time ago.
Yeah.
And, like, is it available for all apps, or just some developers actually have access to it?
I am not 100% up to speed with that, but basically how it works is if you have one of your activities declared as a default and still have the domain and all the things that you use for your home screen activity within your instant app as well, then your app generally is eligible for it. I don't know about the rollout state though, but I've seen it on several apps, and if I remember correctly, I don't think all of them were partners, so I'm pretty sure that it's available to more than that. But if you try it, it doesn't work for your app, please just come back to me and I'll figure out how and why. But I think if we're not doing that widely at the moment, that's the thing that I don't see why we shouldn't.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
We have time for one more question.
Yes, several questions. Is there, can I find somewhere the list of the apps that use instant apps? Because it's not very easy on the store to find some examples. So if I want to, I don't know how many apps are instant apps on the store, but if there are 10,000 apps, I would like to have a look to them easily.
There is a list, it's not publicly accessible, just because we don't have a catalog for that just yet.
Another question. When I launch an instant app, does it create a shortcut on the springboard of the user because I want to be present on his phone?
So there is, for some of the launchers have that. So some of the launchers have that in the recent, so we definitely see that in the recent applications. Some launchers have show instant apps as well on the launcher, but not on the home screen directory. So you won't get real estate on the home screen with an instant app as of now.
And can I send notifications to an instant app? No, it's
not while it's not in foreground. You can send notifications while the app is in foreground. You can use a foreground service for displaying media notifications as well. But currently, once the app is in background, it just gets killed at some point when the system decides it's the right time. And we don't support notifications through push service whatsoever at this point.
And last question, does it have an influence on the App Store ranking if you have this feature in your app? Does it have any influence on the ranking?
That's probably a question for the Play Store team, and we change those over time and every now and then, so I don't know. I'm just a simple engineer. Thanks.
Thank you.